Hello everyone, and welcome to Confusing Sentences Made Clear. My name is Laura Russell, and I'm a scientific editor with Scientific Publications Research Medical Library. In this webinar, I'll point out some common types of sentences that impede understanding and show you how to correct them. The types of sentences included in this presentation are not the only varieties of problematic sentences. They're just some of the most commonly encountered types of sentences that could lead to misunderstanding. By avoiding the sorts of errors you'll see in this presentation, you'll improve the clarity of your writing, make your text easier for your readers to understand and remember, and reduce the chances of your readers becoming frustrated and confused. So let's begin with the common source of confusion, unclear adjectives. Here's our first example sentence, which reads, Dr. Wang's lab provided metastatic cells, assays, and reagents. In this sentence, the problem lies with the adjective metastatic. A scientist will know that the adjective metastatic applies only to the cells, but readers unfamiliar with science could misunderstand and think that it also applies to the assays and reagents. In other words, when an adjective applies to one item in a list, but not all of the items, consider whether readers could misunderstand and think that the adjective applies to all of the listed items. If there's a chance of misunderstanding, you can move the item that the adjective refers to the end of the list. For example, if you change the sentence to Dr. Wang's lab provided assays, reagents, and metastatic cells, the sentence is no longer open to misinterpretation. Sometimes, you might not want to change the order in which items appear in a list. For example, you might want to list items chronologically. In such cases, you can make it clear which word or words an adjective is modifying by using semicolons to separate the listed items. Thus, our original sentence can be fixed by putting semicolons where the commas used to be. Our next sentence reads, Our friend's fish tank contained blue marbles, fish, and no fishing signs. The problem in this sentence is the same as the one that we saw in the previous slide. The adjective placement's unclear, but this time your scientific background won't help you. It's impossible to tell whether the word blue refers to just marbles or whether it also refers to fish in the no fishing signs. Let's look at two possible solutions to this problem. The first, our friend's fish tank contained fish, no fishing signs, and blue marbles, is correct if the word blue is meant to modify only the word marbles. The second solution, our friend's fish tank contains several blue items. Marbles, fish, and no fishing signs is correct if the word blue is supposed to modify all of the items in the list. Only the writer of the sentence can say which is correct, but in each solution, there's no doubt about what the adjective blue refers to. So you can see why it's important to make sure that your adjectives are placed in such a way that it's clear which word or words they modify. Sometimes sentences are confusing because a phrase is in the wrong place. Phrases belong next to the word or words they modify, and if they're placed elsewhere in a sentence, they can cause confusion. For example, in the sentence, the patient had severe leg cramps after running for 4 years, it's clear that the patient hadn't been running for 4 years, but the sentence could be misinterpreted to have that meaning. The problem here is that the phrase for 4 years should modify the patient, but the way the sentence is written, it appears to modify the word running. To fix the problem in this sentence, we need to move the phrase for 4 years next to the words the patient. If we do that, we get, for 4 years, the patient had severe leg cramps after running, and that makes sense. I'm sure that you were able to figure out what the author of the sentence was trying to say, even though the words needed to be rearranged. But remember that it's much more difficult for people to correctly interpret scientific sentences if they contain misplaced phrases. This is especially true if your reader isn't familiar with the topic you're writing about, so be careful to put phrases next to the words or phrases that they modify. Sometimes sentences are unclear because they contain a word or a phrase that modifies a word that isn't in the rest of the sentence or that isn't clearly stated. Here we have the sentence, after studying the map, the labyrinth seemed less daunting. As written, the sentence says that the labyrinth studied the map, and that doesn't make sense. To fix the sentence, we need to supply the missing information. Who was studying the map? In this case, it was Theseus, so we need to put that in. Remember what we said before about putting phrases next to the words they modify. We can fix this sentence by applying that rule. Specifically, we need the word Theseus to be next to the phrase studying the map. One way to do that is to change the sentence to, after studying the map, Theseus found the labyrinth less daunting. A good alternative would be, after Theseus studied the map, the labyrinth seemed less daunting. Here's another example in which a phrase is modifying the wrong thing. In the sentence, in addition to the Western blotting results, fluorescence microscopy showed unusual accumulations of protein, the phrase, in addition to the Western blotting results, incorrectly modifies fluorescence microscopy. That doesn't make sense because fluorescence microscopy doesn't show Western blotting results. To fix this sentence, we need to establish what was showing unusual accumulations of protein. The sentence tells us that fluorescence microscopy showed unusual accumulations of protein, but what the author is trying to say is that Western blotting did too. To make this clear in the sentence, one option is to completely rewrite it to read, Western blotting and fluorescence microscopy showed unusual accumulations of protein. A good alternative would be to rewrite the sentence as, like Western blotting, fluorescence microscopy showed unusual accumulations of protein. Both of these sentences are clearer than the original because we've taken out the phrase that was modifying the wrong thing. Let's look at another example of a sentence in which a phrase is modifying the wrong thing. The sentence reads, similar to the results of prior studies, most patients in our cohort experience shortness of breath after drug administration. The way it's written, it sounds as if the patients were similar to the results of prior studies. That can't be right, so we need to supply the missing information. What was similar to the results of prior studies? If you want to preserve the wording similar to the results of prior studies, you could change the sentence to, similar to the results of prior studies, the results of our current study show that most patients experience shortness of breath after drug administration. In this version of the sentence, the phrase similar to the results of prior studies is modifying a new and correct subject, specifically, the results of our current study, so the revised sentence makes sense. Another way to fix the problem is to put the information about the prior studies into a sentence of its own. So you end up with, most patients in our cohort experience shortness of breath after drug administration. This finding was consistent with the results of prior studies. Some sentences are unclear because the reader can't tell what the pronoun in the sentence refers to. For example, in the sentence, in addition to his dragon identification manual, the knight packed a box of magic potions and a bag of apples, which had been given to him by the king. It's unclear what the pronoun which refers to. Is it the bag of apples, or is it the bag of apples and the box of magic potions? If only the bag of apples was from the king, the sentence could be rewritten as, in addition to his dragon identification manual, the knight packed a box of magic potions as well as a bag of apples that had been given to him by the king. If both the magic potions and the apples were gifts from the king, the sentence could be changed to, in addition to his dragon identification manual, the knight packed 2 items that had been given to him by the king: a box of magic potions and a bag of apples. Now let's consider the sentence, the patients received chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and immunotherapy, which significantly shrunk their tumors. What does the pronoun which refer to here? Is it the chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and immunotherapy? Or is it immunotherapy alone? You can see in this example that unclear pronouns can potentially cause serious misunderstandings in scientific material. If the authors are referring to all 3 types of therapy, the sentence could be rewritten as, the patients received chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and immunotherapy, semicolon. All 3 significantly shrunk their tumors. If the authors are referring only to immunotherapy, the authors could say, the patients received chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and immunotherapy, the last of which significantly shrunk their tumors. Now let's look at a different sort of confusing sentence. Sentences with incomplete comparisons leave readers with unanswered questions. For example, the sentence, the fireworks show was much better, is unclear because it leaves the reader wondering what the fireworks show is being compared to. Is it being compared to the fireworks show from the previous year? Is it being compared to a picnic that took place beforehand? In this example, you might say, the fireworks show over the lake was much better than the one over the parking lot. Now we know what 2 items are being compared. Here's another example of an incomplete comparison. In the sentence, patients treated with cisplatin survive longer, the comparison is incomplete because it doesn't say who the patients treated with cisplatin are being compared to. This wouldn't be a problem if the text just before the sentence were to specify the comparison groups. But in this example, let's just assume that the comparison groups have not been specified. The problem can be fixed by stating that patients treated with cisplatin survive longer than those treated with radiation did. The takeaway message here is that if you're using a comparative adjective or adverb such as better, faster, more elegant, or more enthusiastic, you need to clarify which things or people in the sentence are being compared. Sometimes comparisons in sentences don't make sense or are ambiguous. For example, in the sentence, John likes Amy better than James, we can't tell what's being compared because information's been left out. In the sentence is the sentence comparing how much John likes Amy to how much John likes James? If so, the sentence should read, John likes Amy better than he likes James. In this new version of the sentence, the objects of the sentence, Amy and James, are being compared. But perhaps the sentence is meant to compare how much John likes Amy and how much James likes Amy, in which case the sentence should read, John likes Amy better than James likes Amy. In this version of the sentence, the subjects are being compared. So the bottom line here is that in sentences like this, you need to make it clear whether subjects or objects are being compared. Here's another example with a problematic comparison. As written, the sentence, the caverns in New Mexico had more bats than Missouri, compares New Mexico caverns to the state of Missouri, and the author's intentions are unclear. If the author meant to compare caverns in the 2 states, the sentence could be changed to, the caverns in New Mexico had more bats than the caverns in Missouri had. Alternatively, perhaps the author meant to compare the number of bats in the New Mexico caverns to the number of bats in Missouri. If so, the text could be changed to, there were more bats in the caverns in New Mexico than in the entire state of Missouri. Let's look at another category of confusing sentences. Sometimes sentences are unclear because of subject-verb disagreement. Our problematic sentence reads, the tray of slides were overfilled. The problem here is that the subject of the sentence is tray, so the verb should be singular, but it isn't, it's plural. To fix the sentence, we need to change the verb from were to was so that the sentence reads, the tray of slides was overfilled. It can be tricky to get the verb right in sentences like this one because the sentence contains two nouns, the singular tray and the plural slides. No doubt that's why the author mistakenly used a plural verb in the original sentence. So if you have more than one noun in a sentence, be sure to identify which one is the subject and make sure that the verb is singular if the subject is singular or plural if the subject is plural. Now let's look at an example that shows how confusion between singulars and plurals can make a sentence hard to understand. Our sentence reads, using this immunocompetent mouse models, we expect to enhance our understanding of the disease. This sentence is confusing because the word this is singular, but the word models is plural. It's impossible to tell what the author meant to say. There are two possibilities. If the author is referring to one model, we should make the word model singular so that the sentence reads, using this immunocompetent mouse model, we expect to enhance our understanding of the disease. If the author is referring to more than one model, we should make this plural by changing it to these. Now the sentence reads, using these immunocompetent mouse models, we expect to enhance our understanding of the disease. So far, we've discussed misplaced words, but misplaced or missing punctuation can also cause confusion. I'd like to show you how punctuation can improve or complicate a reader's understanding of how items are grouped in a long list of items. Take a look at the sentence, for the picnic, we packed sandwiches, boxes of fruit, vegetables, and crackers, cakes, and sodas. As written, the sentence is unclear because the reader can't tell if the words boxes of applies to the fruit alone or to the vegetables and crackers also. In sentences with long, complex lists, semicolons or parentheses can be used to clarify what items belong together. For example, with semicolons added to the original sentence, you can see that the words boxes of do indeed apply to the vegetables and crackers as well. Our new clarified sentence reads, for the picnic, we packed sandwiches, semicolon, boxes of fruit, vegetables, and crackers, semicolon, cakes, semicolon, and sodas. Here's another example in which the grouping of items is unclear. The sentence reads, your risk of liver cancer is higher than average if you have chronic hepatitis C infection, inherited metabolic disease, including hemochromatosis, glycogen storage disease, porphyria cutanea tarda, or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The problem here is that it isn't clear from the way the sentence is punctuated whether glycogen storage disease and porphyria cutanea tarda are inherited metabolic diseases or not. There are two solutions here. You can add parentheses to group the items together, as shown on this slide, or you can separate the items in the list with semicolons, as we did in the previous example. Either way, the reader will now be able to tell that glycogen storage disease and porphyria cutanea tarda are both inherited metabolic diseases. David, to answer your question, yes, it's fine to mix semicolons and commas. Another thing to pay attention to in sentences is the use of commas around clauses, because comma placement can change the meaning of a sentence. Let's look at some correct sentences and see how the presence or absence of commas affects their meaning. Our first sentence is, drummers who practice after school will get to perform in the concert. As you can see, there are no commas around the words who practice after school. This sentence means that only those drummers who practice after school will get to perform in the concert. The words who practice after school are essential to the meaning of the sentence. Our second sentence reads, drummers, comma, who practice after school, comma, will get to perform in the concert. In this sentence, the commas around the words who practice after school are very important because they indicate that the words who practice after school aren't necessary to identify the word they modify, which is drummers. In other words, all drummers will get to perform in the concert, and the fact that they practice after school is not essential to the meaning of this sentence. Now let's take a look at the importance of placing commas properly in scientific writing. In the sentence, all patients, comma, who were under the age of 18 years, comma, were excluded from our study, there are commas present, so the sentence means that all patients were excluded from the study. But that's clearly not what the author of the sentence intended to say. But look what happens if you remove the commas from the sentence. Without commas, the sentence means that only patients under the age of 18 were excluded from the study. The meaning of the sentence has changed entirely. One trick that I find helpful is to read a sentence that has commas around the clause without the information that appears between the commas. For example, if you read the problematic sentence shown on this slide without the information between the commas, you're left with, all patients were excluded from our study. If the text makes sense without the information between the commas, great. If it doesn't make sense, delete the commas. So I have several takeaway messages for you to remember. Place words or phrases as close as possible to the words that they describe. Be careful with adjectives, modifying phrases, and pronouns, and verify that they refer to the intended word. If you're using a comparative adjective or adverb, such as kinder, smarter, more responsive, or more colorful, be sure to clarify which things or people in the sentence are being compared. When you make a comparison, clarify whether subjects or objects are being compared. Check for subject-verb agreement to make sure that if your subject is singular, the verb is singular, and if your subject is plural, the verb is plural. In sentences with long, complex lists, use semicolons or parentheses to clarify what items belong together. And you can, as I mentioned, you can mix commas and semicolons in the same sentence. For sentences with commas around the clause, read the sentence without the clause to see if it makes sense. If it does, wonderful. If it doesn't, delete the commas. Lastly, let me go back here. Lastly, the best way to identify problematic sentences is to read through your manuscript very carefully, at least once, and preferably more than that to check for errors. You could also ask a colleague familiar with the scientific content of your manuscript to make sure that the text is clear and correct. And you're always welcome to send your manuscript to scientific publications. That brings us to the end of our webinar. If you have any questions, you're welcome to submit them now through the chat room. If you need some more guidance, here are 2 resources that might be helpful to you. The Elements of Style by Strunk and White is a very small book. My copy is only 92 pages long, but it offers great information on correct English usage and style. It also includes information on misused words and expressions. The al.purdue.edu website offers free resources on topics like grammar, English as a second language, and professional writing. Finally, I'd like to mention that if you're looking for help with an MD Anderson writing project, you can always turn to Scientific Publications. We offer free substantive editing and copy editing of journal articles and grant proposals. We also offer quick editing of short documents, consultations, webinars, and classes for those writing research articles or grant proposals, or for non-native English speakers wanting to polish their writing, presentation, and speaking skills. So feel free to give us a call or send us an email. And links to our past webinars can be found via the link shown above. Just click on Publishing and Writing. Our Avoiding Wordiness and Common Basics webinars touch on some of the concepts I've discussed here. I hope that the information I've covered today has been useful to everyone, and if you'd like to review any of it, a recording of this webinar and a PDF of the slides will be available through the Research Medical Library website. Thanks very much for joining us for today's presentation, and I wish you all the best of luck with your writing projects.